Welcome back to Season 2 of Conversations with Colie podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Miller, the author of the book series A through Z Guide to Raising a Good Human, a book series that I wrote to start the communication process between parents and children, starting from birth and why conversation is important. This year, I want to invite you to join me and my guests as we talk about all the subjects and topics that we hear about in everyday life, like human trafficking, grief, relationships, near-death experiences, and all the insights that we can learn from these subjects and topics, and how to look at things from both sides of the spectrum without using bias. Join me and my guests this season as we heat up the summer and the airwaves with our hot topics, and we start opening the doors and shaking out the rugs that we have been carrying with us through generations to truly be the change.
Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Colie. Today we are having a panel discussion on a topic we are all sure to face in our lives, grief. I would like to welcome Debbie Weiss and Melissa Bright. Welcome, ladies. Go around the room and introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and how grief impacted your life.
Thank you. So I will go ahead and go. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Bright, and I am a mental health podcaster and also a life coach. And grief has affected me at the age of 25. When I was 25, I lost my mom, who was my best friend. And then 10 years later, when I was 35, I lost my father. So now I have been living on this planet without both of my parents, navigating it on my own. So that's a little bit of my story.
Nice. Debbie?
I'm Debbie Weiss. I'm an author. My book is available as is, A Midlife Widow's Search for Love. I'm also a former attorney and current yoga teacher in training. I'm kind of a dilettante. Grief impacted my life first when I was 10 years old and I lost my mother after a brief illness. I went on to have, I think, a terrific childhood with a wonderful single dad, but just before my 50th birthday, I lost my my love of my life and husband of 32 years to cancer. That was the impetus to write my book. So that's how grief's affected me.
Yeah, I'm sorry for both of your losses. First, we're going to do an icebreaker question. What is the meaning of life in one word?
Debbie, do you want to go first on this one?
Who wants to take that?
Word, right?
In one word. I'm gonna say joy.
I'm gonna say contentment.
Okay.
Fulfilling is coming to my mind, so that's what I'm gonna go with.
Okay, perfect. I've always said go with the first word that comes to mind.
Exactly.
All right, starting with Debbie, can you share a story of how you reacted initially to a profound loss?
Well, certainly the profound loss for me, again, I was 49 and I lost my husband to cancer. And initially, he was in denial when he passed. So that was very hard and it made the loss much more difficult. So I basically reacted badly. And I reacted on one hand with my lawyer mode of getting a lot done. Very quickly, I'd sort of straightened out all the paperwork and all. And on the other hand, at night, I reacted very darkly. I basically sat on the floor of my living room and drank and threw a few glasses here and there.
I don't blame you. How about you, Melissa?
Yeah. So with my mom's being, the first one and I think that was the first real life lesson that I ever got from like, oh, wow, the world can be really, really cruel. Like just thought it, was a very bad nightmare. And quickly about that, I also had my daughter when I was 16. And that's what made my mom and I's bond so close, because she helped me in every aspect that she could, to be my best friend, my babysitter, my support system, everything. So when I lost her, initially, I really feel like I dealt with it well.
Okay.
But my body told me otherwise. And I would develop what I now know was debilitating anxiety for like the next 10 years until in 2020 when I finally addressed it. So grief affected me in the way of my nervous system was a wreck, and I didn't even understand what that meant until 10 years later. And I'm so happy I figured out what happened, but that's how it deeply impacted me.
Yeah. And I do want to get into later in the discussion about how grief impacts us spiritually, mentally, and physically, because I don't think a lot of people realize when you're taking on a grief and when you're going through it, you may be processing it and thinking that you're operating normally, but really and truly not at all, because I mean, you have just gone through a traumatic experience by losing someone close to you.
Yeah.
Melissa, what is grief in your own words? If you can describe grief in your own words, how would you describe it?
Can I say more than one word?
No, in your own words, not in one word.
Okay. I would say it's like the dark shadow in the corner that just kind of doesn't leave you, but then sometimes it will, and then sometimes it's there again, and it just like comes and goes. And sometimes you realize that the shadow's there, and other times you're not so aware. It's like it's ebbs and flows, maybe in different seasons, different, events that might be holding more emotion or whatever attachment to that. So I would say it's kind of like a shadow. Sometimes it's there, or maybe it's always there. You just don't notice it. Yeah. That would be my description.
Nice. Debbie?
I would say it's missing something that you were attached to. It's a feeling that something is absent and you're missing it very much. And usually that comes from love.
I've described grief as a lead jacket that you have to wear to get up through the sleepless nights, the fitful naps, all the thoughts that come in. You're just weighted down by this emotion that I describe. That's the way I describe grief. A popular belief around grief is you can't find a silver lining or a positive from a loss. My positive for me, I lost my child. I lost my child to poor medical care. Because of that loss and my desire to make it right, because the doctor that was my doctor did not come to me. She completely cast me aside onto the doctor that was on call and dealt with me. But he admitted to my face that he did the wrong thing, and that if he would have acted differently, my child would still be there. That made me upset. And so I wanted to sue. In those days, suing on a stillbirth was, you may or may not win. So my mother-in-law, who is a bear and was like, we're not giving this up, went after their licenses, and those licenses were pulled. Those people lost their license, and I was not the only person that was damaged. So that was my silver lining. That is how I dealt with my grief. In your experiences, ladies, did you ever find a positive or a silver lining from your loss?
Debbie, do you want to take this one first? I mean, I don't care. I just hate to be always
I can try. Initially, I did not see any silver lining. I think that for me, what was interesting is that any of the, I don't want to say positives from this, but maybe positive change from this came only about 3 or 4 years after the loss. So for me, the positives came with time, and and they still weren't like an upside as with that type of loss, but they did come from finding joy again and contentment to get back to the meaning of life, and changing and living in ways that I never had when I was half of a couple, because I'd been with my late husband since I was 17 and I'd known him since I was 7. And I was very much a person who was only half a couple. And honestly, if I'd stayed married, I never would have had the experiences I had, or written a book, or I got a master's. And at a less trivial level, I never would have become a more empathetic, less judgmental person who could interact better with people, and I hope offer some modicum of help and compassion.
Yeah. Melissa?
Debbie, that was beautiful. And I like the way that you said, not necessarily a positive, but a positive change. And I feel that I relate to that too, because mine came 10 years later after I lost my mom, 2020 COVID, for whatever reason, that I wanted to talk to her more than I had ever had in the 10 years prior. And so that basically led to like a nervous breakdown, if you will. And I finally sought professional help. And simultaneously, while getting my own professional help, I started my podcast, which catapulted me into my healing journey. And kind of like Debbie was saying, if things wouldn't have happened, maybe we wouldn't be where we are. I don't know that I would have went on a healing journey. I don't know if I would have ever have gotten to a higher self, but through losing now both parents and being completely on my own, I guess there was no other option. And I'm glad I chose this option, because the other options of anxiety and not dealing with it was not clearly working. So the positive change, I would say, would be the positive thing.
Nice. Yeah. Because a lot of people, when they're grieving, it's hard for them to find anything to be, I guess, to live for, maybe. Because when we lose somebody that's super close to us, we can't understand why we are still here. That's at least the way I was viewing it. Why am I still here? Did any of you experience that yourselves surrounding the death of your loved one? Like, did you look at yourself and be like, well, I can't understand why I'm still here and they are not?
I can speak to that. Yeah, I did, because when I lost my husband, I was 50, almost 50, and I'd been with him for 32 years, and he was a workaholic. I'd known him since I was 7. We'd grown up. He was my person. I'd quit law 10 years before, so my life was him. That was my life. And I really didn't understand, well, A, I'd already lost my mom, so it kind of felt like I gave at the office, and when I was young, and B, I really sort of didn't understand, well, how am I supposed to put a life together? My life revolved around George, who was my husband. So I very much did feel that way. And again, it wasn't until I had to say, well, I am still here. And honestly, I didn't want to freak out my poor father, that I had to say, okay, what am I going to do with this time, with what I have left? And to appreciate that it was a privilege.
Yeah.
For me, I don't know that I have ever felt that. What I felt when losing her in years later was like getting older, me being somebody totally different than I was at 25, thinking I knew everything. Well, lose your mom and that'll tell you real quick that you don't know anything. So for me, I think I got more sad about what we most get sad about is their not getting to be here for whatever that is, or things that she may have tried to talk to me about when I was younger. But I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to say to me, Mom. Like, you're trying to have a mom and daughter moment. But I didn't realize that until maybe older. So then I got kind of sad about some of the things that she had to go through and live through that I didn't understand what she was trying to tell me. So I don't know if that was guilt around that, but maybe just more sadness for her, maybe wishing she had like a better life.
What are other griefs we encounter besides the death of a loved one? Can you guys maybe pinpoint any?
For me, the loss of a relationship, that one's close for me now, because I just got out of a 7-year relationship back in November, and that grief is so strange because the person is still living, and yet you are still having to live your life without them, not talk to them, not see them. It's a whole different type of grief, but it's there, and it's hard. And I think at one moment in the last couple months, I've asked, which one was harder, losing my mom or losing somebody that is still 10 minutes down the road that I can no longer interact with or whatever, and of course it's just a question you ask yourself. I didn't have an answer, but
yeah,
those are hard. People that go through divorces or whatever, it's losing people that are still living here.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Debbie?
Yeah, I agree, Melissa. I'm so sorry. I think those kinds of relationships, breakups are so hard, and people don't take them seriously enough, and that they can leave you with doubts and thoughts that, honestly, being widowed, I know my husband and I loved each other dearly and would still be together. It's a different thing. I'm a little older, so what came to my mind in an odd way is a way of life. The world has changed so fast. COVID, I remember, took so much away at that time. And I guess I'm looking at kind of a way of life, the way things were, maybe a community, that type of thing. I know I think people losing sometimes, being widowed, divorced, whatever, you lose your community, you lose the way you live. If you want to add different times like COVID or something, or just changes in the world, you lose a sense of kind of a way of being.
I agree.
That's a good point.
Did grief ever take you to a dark place? And do you want to share that experience? And it doesn't have to be necessarily the death. It could be if a grief of, like you said, Melissa, a living person. Because I can completely echo that. I know what it's like to lose somebody that lives and breathes, but you can't communicate with them. So did grief ever take any of you to a dark place?
I would be lying if I'd say it didn't, for both my mom and, for the loss of my relationship. However, if I had to compare, I think this time, just sitting with my emotions and knowing that sometime there'll be a different side, I guess. But I didn't try to avoid it this time, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I knew that the sadness was going to be here, and I wasn't like, why are you sad? It's like, no, you're supposed to be sad. So, yeah, definitely dark times, definitely drinking times, definitely don't want to get out of bed times. I mean, I will not deny that for a second.
Debbie?
Oh yeah. When I lost my husband, I was in a darker place. I was in a dark place, but the darker times came to me probably maybe into sort of like the second year. People say that widowhood is harder. The really dark times came to me when I'd sort of calmed down enough, and I wasn't drinking as much, but I was supposed to be pulling my life together, and how was I going to live? And he wasn't in the world anymore. And how could I make sense of a world without him and want to be in this world? And everybody, and a lot of people, you don't get that. People are like, are you over it? Are you better? I was healthy. I looked fine. So people were acting like, well, this is such a great opportunity. And it's like, yeah, you're going home to your spouse, man. So I was really dark, and I was dating. And that, when I was seeing what that was like, that was really making me contemplate that my future might be very, very well likely as a single person, which isn't the end of the world. But again, I was getting very dark, looking at kind of like, well, what is my life really going to be like, for the next 20 years when I've stopped living on takeout and Netflix, In fact, I didn't feel like people were dealing with the darkness enough. And that's kind of what led me to write my book, because I felt like people were looking at widowhood like this course in self-improvement and you get over it. And it felt so unreal to me that I was blogging on the Huffington Post about it, on blogging in general. And that kind of led to part of why I wrote my book.
When you were in those dark places, girls, what finally was the thing that kind of shed the light where it was like, okay, I need to get out of this space?
I don't even know. If you know, Debbie, you can go ahead because I'm not sure.
For me, it's amorphous. I think you're right. Like, I can't exactly say what, but I would say enough time passed that, and again, this is a different situation because, I was widowed 10 years ago. So my breakup's not fresh. My life is very different now. And I can really look back. But, what I could look back on is the fact that I just started very slowly to do some things that I enjoyed. And I started to fill my time. The things that my late husband never wanted to travel, so I traveled. I joined a yoga studio. I made a group of girlfriends. So I guess I joined hiking groups. To summarize this kind of awkwardly now is that I started to make connections on my own. And that was what helped me, was to start to make connections that were unrelated to my old life, and to realize that I could create new memories, but it didn't feel like there was always this phantom of George by my side. And to start to make connections and feel that I wasn't isolated in this world, even if I no longer had a partner.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you say that, because mine, I feel like, was opposite. With my mom, I was younger. I was 25. And so I had all the friends around me, at that time, that I feel like I was always busy. And so it didn't seem as rough per se. But like whenever my boyfriend and I broke up, if we're talking about that grief, that's when now with it being 7 months, I've done a lot of things that him and I wouldn't have otherwise done, but I don't have the 10 million, like the 10,000 friends or even the 10 friends. It's like, oh man, it's just Melissa right now, and like navigating that. So I've kind of have done what Debbie's done, doing stuff that maybe my ex and I wouldn't have done, to be able to find my joy again, because, well, that's what I need to do now.
And I do kind of want to highlight that grief doesn't have to be packaged in death. It can be the loss of a job, the loss of a spouse, the loss of, a divorce. It could be a breakup. It could be the loss of a job that you loved. People go through these griefs, and sometimes we sink to those darker places. It's realizing that you're in the dark place and saying, I need to get out of the dark place. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what grief does to us. First, we'll start with mentally. Can either one of you maybe recount what a deep grief did to you mentally? Were you able to pinpoint what it was doing to you mentally? For me, I could see myself sinking into a depression. The world looked darker to me until the sunshine came out. Now, did I know that in those moments? It's been 28 years for me since I lost my son. No, but when the sun came out, that's when I noticed that I was viewing the world in a darker shade than that bright, sunny, new beginning kind of mindset.
Oh, yeah. When I lost my mom, I think over the years, I definitely felt like, for sure, like a victim. Like, I was so sad. I was pissed off at the world that you took my mom at 25. And then I was even more mad that it took away my naiveness. Like, I had all these bright plans for my future without my mom's support. And it got taken away, I feel.
Yeah.
So that really, really messed me up, because I lost my biggest support system ever. Yeah. And I just felt very what is the word? Dealt a shitty hand, I guess, is for lack of better words.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way of putting it, because at 25, you need your mom, especially
Mhm.
being a mom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Wow. Debbie?
Well, yeah, that really brought some stuff up for me too, because I lost my mom when I was 10, and I don't think about that a
Oh.
lot. When I lost my husband, I kind of became sort of cynical. That's my natural bent, probably as a lawyer. And I lost my IQ. I couldn't read a book. I couldn't focus. I'd been his caregiver. The world did seem a little darker. In some ways, it seemed a little brighter because I was still alive, and I knew that. But I lost my brain power, and it was very disconcerting, and I couldn't focus. And even with my phone maps apps and things, I would still get lost, and I didn't understand why I couldn't figure out my life. And I wish I'd been more gentle with myself. That's my advice to a new griever about anything. Please be gentle. Give yourself way more time than you think, because it took me a long time to get my brain back. And it's like, I'm really proudest that when I went back to school, and I got my MFA in creative writing in 2020, and it meant like my brain's back, and when I could read a book again, my brain was back. I felt like at least I was me. The hardest thing in some sense was losing my sense of like, what happened to this brain? What happened to the person who, passed the bar first time? What happened to this person who's happy alone with a book? I couldn't sit still. I was so anxious and amped. And that's one thing I really realized I'd lost, was my sense of ease, because I was so busy trying to drive myself to an event, to get out of the house, to try to recover, and pushing so hard and pushing so much energy at it. I completely lost that ease. And then later I realized I'd led a super, super cautious life because of losing my mom. I'm super close to my dad. I never wanted to let him out of my sight after my mom, because, a parent can die, right? You got to keep an eye on him. That'll keep him there. And it's only later, when I was 50, that I sort of went, well, okay, what are the things I might have wanted to do when I was younger, but I didn't, because I married my high school sweetheart and went straight from college to law school at universities that were within an hour of my house. So it was almost later that I kind of started to integrate the loss of my mom and kind of go back to what did I want to do in an adolescent kind of way. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
Thank you.
did. It did. What about spiritually? Did losing your loved one or having that grief happen to you suddenly, did it do anything to you spiritually? I had a whole spiritual fuck you, is what I had for a while, until life and the universe decided to say, ha ha ha, fuck you back. Now wake up and take something out of this. So what about you ladies? Did you experience a spiritual maybe breakdown, an awakening, anything like that?
When I was 25, I was not very spiritual, I won't lie. And I'm just now getting like really, really into it. So at least for this loss, like my breakup, I'm so happy that I have spirituality in terms of meditation and believing that there is something inside me, greater than me, that has helped me, because when you don't have, mom, dad, whatever, but when I was 25, I didn't have spirituality. Like, I believed in God, but I didn't do what I do these days. So I can't really talk too much about that.
Debbie?
I've never been a particularly religious person. Certainly not since I was 10, because I figured, this is a 10-year-old brain. In an ordered universe, there was no reason to take my mother.
Yeah, good point.
So I'm pretty much an atheist.
Gotcha.
But and when I lost George, I could only again look at, well, you live in a random universe, so it's not, the world isn't out to get you, but that doesn't mean it isn't a hostile universe. And it honestly wasn't until some years later that I feel like, honestly, in one part, took enough steps to make my life better, but I also felt the universe helped me out. Looking back, I've been very lucky in terms of being healthy. I have an amazing dad. He's still with us at 93. 5 years ago, I met my partner. He was at a low point. He said he manifested me. When I met him, he was grieving his mom.
Aw.
And we decided to be friends. And then 2 years ago, we moved. And my life is really is different now. And I do believe in a kind of cosmic karma and universe.
Right.
But weirdly enough, I started to feel that way in my late 50s.
Okay. I like that.
So
Thank you for saying that. What about physically? Melissa, we're going to hand that one to you because you mentioned that your body was reacting to your grief. So do you want to share?
Yeah. This one is probably the biggest one that's affected me, is the anxiety. I'll never forget the first time, I can't say, maybe it was 2 months after I lost my mom, me and all my friends were going to a restaurant, and I felt something going on inside me. And this was 12 years ago. So whatever phone I had, but I Googled like whatever was happening, and it said, this is probably anxiety. So then ever since then I was like, oh, this is anxiety. And that's all I thought. Well, as the years went on, it got worse, but then I started asking more questions. And so I'm starting to notice when is it happening? And I saw that it was happening when life was so great. When me and my daughter and my ex were together and we were camping and we were doing this, that's when it ramped up. And I finally realized, oh my God, my anxiety is happening because I am waiting for the next shoe to drop. What else is going to happen? Who else am I going to lose? And so my body was so worried and trying to prepare myself for another loss. And so once I finally realized that, that's in 2020 when I finally went to therapy. And that's when somebody really explained like what it is, what's happening inside your body. And once I became aware and more educated about it, I felt like it no longer had this big power over me. Like I was just powerless over and I can't do anything. It was like, no, I can kind of talk back to it and say like, whatever is happening, whatever thought just shot across my brain, I'm not really in danger. I just think I am. And so I've learned, tools, meditation, all kinds of stuff, but it really, really messed with a lot of so many good times, vacations, because my body was just an absolute wreck. It also comes, not that this matters, but like, when I put a lot of pressure on myself, like I'm about to do like a big move or something. But yeah, oh my God, anxiety I don't wish that on anybody because it all kinds of transpires in people differently. And mine was nausea. And my boyfriend always said to me, I don't understand what it feels like. Can you explain it? And I said, my anxiety for me was if somebody would come up behind me and scare me in that moment that you jump and your heart races, that's my body for 7 hours. It's not just 5 minutes. It's for 7 hours. And that was the only way I could. And I'm like, I can't live like this. I cannot do this. 10 years was long enough. So I'm so glad I got help.
Yeah. Debbie?
It's interesting you say that, Melissa, because I have anxiety and I've had it my whole life. And it's much better now than it has been. And it got much worse. When my husband was dying, I was probably in worse shape physically than after he died because I was his caregiver and I was waking up in the middle of the night to give him his things he needed. And I'm blanking on what it is, but you break a pneumonia capsule when someone's not breathing properly. And we didn't have enough help. And being his caregiver, and he was in denial, and that was a mess. I had hives, and this was ugly. So I was pretty much physically a mess when he died. And then actually afterwards, I was probably in some better shape. I still didn't sleep, but I didn't think I was killing the poor man. I wasn't responsible for another person. Grief therapy helped me tremendously. I'm still in therapy for anxiety, and it's much better, but I think of it more as like a healthy, checking in, talking about the things I might not wish to share with my partner, just being able to speak really, really freely. So yeah, I was more anxious when I was younger, like when I was in law school and I was practicing lawyer, I was more of a stress bomb. So physically, I was just very thin. when I lost my husband. If I look at pictures, everybody says I looked amazing. Well, I look like I had an eating disorder, and I didn't. But people love thin women, right?
Yeah.
And so you look great, yeah. And but I would say physically for me, and this is just different. I was in the really, really terrible shape when I was a caregiver, and that's something I wish people were more aware of. But that, it's a different issue. Once my husband passed, I think my body kind of recovered on its own again, just because while there was the stress of losing him, there wasn't the stress of being responsible for him.
That's a great point.
Yep.
That's a great point. Stuffing it. Is that healthy? Why or why not? Some people just stuff it. Ignore it. What do y'all have to say about stuffing it?
Doesn't work. Can't do it. It always comes back to bite you in the ass. Or it manifests as some ailment or disease or anxiety. It's gonna come back. That's what I believe, because I believe that's what it did to me. I thought I was fine, and then I watched fried green tomatoes 10 years later and lose my mind and start therapy like 2 days later. I do think it serves its purpose. I really do think it serves its purpose, because when it is so hard to even think about, I do understand that. So I don't want anybody to say like, oh, you just have to constantly be thinking about it. I don't say that. I do know that the ramifications can manifest as ailments, diseases, all these other things. So I think eventually, if you feel like you're in a better spot to maybe start addressing it and sitting through the pain or whatever a little bit at a time, that would be my opinion.
Debbie?
Yeah, I think we're also talking about the difference between quote unquote stuffing it and compartmentalizing. And some people are better. They're better at that than others. For some people, compartmentalizing might work. For others, maybe you just need a really extended period amount of time when you are not, socially viable, whatever that means. But no, stuffing is a terrible idea. I think it's a very archaic idea. And it was one that was in place when I lost my mom. When I was 10, the idea, I always said, how come I never got counseling? How come nobody ever asked me was I was okay? And worse yet, how come people made me play dodgeball and do my damn algebra homework? I never really got to mourn my mother. And I got over that. I had a great dad, but what I was told, and it's oddly enough, my stepmom's a pediatrician. She's explained to me that at that time in 1973, the model was that if a kid seemed to be doing fine, they thought it was better not to bring it up, and that just let the kid was like processing it or doing whatever on their own, and that it was worse to have them talk about it, which is ridiculous. Things changed, I think, later in the 70s. But I think the point I'm making is this is a very, very archaic model, and it doesn't work. And I think it also goes to the shame of grieving, like complicated grief. How dare you? Oh my God, can you get over it better? I always had the sense of, a good widow gets over this and moves on with her life. A bad widow wallows. And I think very much I think there's a shame that comes with grief, and also that comes with loneliness, and that it is so important to get rid of that.
I agree 100%, because there are those, I guess, impressions that you get from your peers when you're still grieving, but they're past the situation. Did you ever find that? Like, I know with mine, when my son died, he wasn't gone 2 months, and people were like, what are you still sad for? Everything happens for a reason, saying all that cliche stuff. Now I'm only 18 years old, y'all. I'm a young girl, and I remember sitting in rooms and everyone's just living around me and thinking, your worlds are going on, but mine can't. And how can you tell me to just get over it? Stuff it.
I have some thoughts on this, and this is something that I didn't realize until I got out of my relationship that I just did. And it was in a lot of ways, I feel like I did okay with my mom's death. In other ways, I think my boyfriend was very uncomfortable with me talking about my mom at any capacity. And he equated me talking about my mom as I wasn't over her death. So he thought I needed help. And I have a lot of resentment towards him about that. And I actually asked him when we broke up, like, hey, what did you mean by like, how did you know I wasn't over my mom's death? And he goes, well, I could just tell the way that you talked about her. And I didn't even address it, but I knew that was going to be the answer. Like, how dare him tell me that I'm not over my mom because I talk about her?
Right.
Like, that I want to honor my mom. I want to keep her alive in my memory for as long as I can. But I think it was him selfishly not knowing how to handle me, because I wasn't sobbing in tears anytime maybe sometimes, but it wasn't, like, oh God, here we go again, Melissa. Never like that. And so I really had to reconcile that somebody else was putting their beliefs. And so I've spent the past couple months differentiating, like, okay, was I actually kind of okay when my mom was gone for 10 years besides my debilitating anxiety? Like, I didn't drug myself to death. Well, I did for a couple months, but like not for 10 years straight.
Right.
And so I'm trying to differentiate, like, whose belief was that? And I believe that it was his, and he just didn't know how to handle even just talking. And so I think, like, just somebody else telling you how to do, when to do, how to be is like, I don't know. I have some resentment about it. And so I don't feel like it should be anybody else's place to tell somebody how to do that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Cause you just completely kind of answered what I was feeling as that young girl, for sure. Yeah. Debbie, do you have anything to add on that?
I do. One, I think that just off the top of my head, Nicole, when you lost, your baby and all, I think that it's only maybe even recently that people are starting to look at the loss of an infant early on with true compassion and understanding that changes lives. I don't have any kids, but I do understand from my reading that has been glossed over in the past, that isn't something that women were allowed to properly mourn as the loss of a child. And from friends I've spoken with who are older, that's my understanding. That kind of grief has never been acknowledged. Societally wasn't acknowledged as the loss of a child.
Right.
That's from my girlfriends, something I understand. As a widow, I don't have kids, so ignore that if that was totally off the mark.
No.
What I found, well, actually, women were fine. Men sucked. Because a lot of them seemed very uncomfortable with the idea that I would like burst into tears or that I was never over my husband. I wrote about this. I mean, that's why I started to write. I have articles out there about what not to say to a widow. And and if you want us to feel better, let us talk about the people we've lost. This is the stuff I've written over the years, because we integrate our losses. We do not get over them. They become a part of us. And what's important is that we incorporate them into our lives. So every time, Melissa, that you have a dish that reminds you of maybe something your mom made or a special occasion you had talking about it is healthy. To my mind, this is the good stuff. I talk about my late husband all the time. He was with me for 32 years of my life. Over half my life was with him. Yeah. And that men were threatened by the fact that I guess he was a good man, or somehow I was, in their case, that I was supposed to be accepting real shit is another issue. Dating turned me into a misandrist. Not the point of this, but I do realize
you have to have a different podcast.
I may have one of my own someday. Probably not.
Yeah.
But one thing that really did help me is like my current partner really understood and likes my late husband too. We both love George. We listened to records on his turntable. I think it was his lot the other night. My late husband to me is an absent friend. And I was lucky enough to find a partner who thought of George as an absent friend and not be threatened by that. But I do think in my case that some of the discomfort I felt from people when I spoke about my husband was that they would think I would have an emotional breakdown that would be uncomfortable for them. And people aren't happy dealing with unhappy people. And secondly, that some men were just simply threatened. And that's on them. because we should all be grown-ups at some point.
And you should be able to talk about your loved one. That is, to me, that is how I have gotten over other griefs that I've experienced in my life. I keep that person alive, that memory. Yep. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to talk about someone that meant something to you.
Right.
It really is because people are uncomfortable and they don't know what to do, how to say, what to be. That's why I'm just honest. I've lost both of my parents and I still don't know what to say to people when they've lost people. And I just say that. I'm like, I know nothing I can say can help. And I'm not even good at this. Like, it is awkward, but instead of making the other person feel bad, like, just admit it. Like, oh, I don't know what to say or whatever.
And that's exactly how I do it too. When someone experiences a death that they can't handle, I come in as a space holder. I tell them, I don't know what to say to make you feel better, because there's nothing that's going to make you feel better. No words are going to make you feel better unless I can bring your loved one back.
Right. Yep.
So I think that is a fair thing to say, is instead of saying those insensitive things, maybe, or to say, I'm holding this against you because when you talk about it, I feel you're going off on these, you're trying to relive in this, grief mode. You're just trying to say, hey, I have a memory and I want to share it with you because you're my person.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've written, when I was promoting my book and stuff, I was posting a lot on social media, and occasionally somebody would tell me something like, I remember hearing one time somebody like, well, losing a husband, sure, but imagine being a twin and losing your twin, or imagine this. And I just started to put, I'm sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine going through what you've been through. And that was not great, but at least it let me answer something, because I felt kind of awkward. It's like, no, I can't speak to this. And maybe just, I can't imagine going through that, to me, was helpful. The other thing is, if you know somebody, sharing a good memory is helpful. When my husband passed, some of his friends didn't contact me, and I was like, what? And they were awkward. They didn't know. But his colleagues who he worked with, some of them wrote me letters with a good memory of him. And that was very meaningful to me.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, that's another thing that you can do for someone that might be grieving a loss, is if you have a memory, share it with that person that was closest to them, so that they can have that to hold on to, maybe pull it out once in a while to give you something to smile about.
Yep.
What is the craziest thing someone has done to you while you were in your grief? Like for me, for example, I had people coming up to me. So at the funeral for my son, that same year, a bunch of babies in my husband's family were born. So there were a bunch of babies the same age as my son would have been, were at the funeral. And I was holding a baby. I wasn't feeling any type of way. I was, just being a gracious host at this thing. And my aunt ran over to me and was like, are you okay? Like, I was about to go crazy at any moment. Has anybody ever treated you that way? Like, they're waiting for the mental breakdown. My ex-husband also had said to me, when I bought you our dog, I was afraid you were going to dress it in baby clothes. Now, why would you think something like that? Has anybody ever said something off the wall or made you feel? Debbie is nodding her head. Debbie?
Well, okay. When I lost my husband, I was pretty isolated. That's one thing that, helped me after I lost him, to make connections, to realize I needed friends. And I contacted a very old friend of mine I hadn't seen since college. And apparently she had not loved my husband much, although he was an amazing person who was loved by all and was such a good person to the folks he worked with and his parents. I'm going to cry. And she said, well, I always thought he was holding you back, and now you have a chance for a new life.
Wow.
Yeah. If you don't, that's something you keep to yourself, right? He's not going to learn from this.
No.
And I was just like, great. Well, now you're kind of making me cast years of my life in doubt. And needless to say, we did not stay connected very long.
You hung up 5 seconds later.
Well, yeah, we were. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Melissa, did you ever experience?
I haven't, except for I don't even know. It's not even a story, but so if I lost my mom, I have a stepdad who is now remarried, and sometimes I feel like his new wife is not the most tactful in the way that she says things. She'll say things about my mom, and I'm like, I'm here. I'm sitting right here. My daughter's right there. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's really the only thing is that would be my experience. I've never had anybody, like what Debbie was saying, but that stuff kind of pisses me off.
Right.
Because she obviously never knew her or whatever. And yeah,
Right.
but I just think once again, it's their own stuff. And I just have to be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. So, what advice can we offer people maybe to start doing something differently around a grieving person?
I think being aware, or maybe I don't even want to say having a script in your pocket. I don't want to say that, but knowing that the cliche things to say aren't, I don't want to say they're bad, but just being mindful or asking, hey, what do you need right now? Or how can I support you? I've also been told by a widower that wasn't the best thing because like they can't even think right now. So it's like you just make the decision. But that would be my advice. She probably has way better advice, but
I would say don't abandon us. I mean, I think people are uncomfortable around somebody who's grieving, especially at first, and and the idea is, well, maybe they want to be left alone, and we can make that decision. A grieving person can make that decision for themselves. So I would say don't abandon them. But and it is hard, I know, and I have heard that too, Melissa, or something. What can I do? What are you what are you going to say? Well, I kind of need my house painted, right? You're not going to,
right.
But I think it helps. Please not to abandon the grieving person, and to offer something small and easy to do, like, would you like to have coffee and talk? Or do you want to go for a walk? I'm a big walker.
Yeah.
So like, if I don't know what to do with a person, if grieving or not, I'll be like, oh, do you want to go for a walk? And like for a grieving person, I think it helps to like say, oh, I walk a lot. Do you want to walk this week? Do you want to walk next week? Just to offer to get together for something modest and easy to do.
Yeah, I like that. Melissa, what about you? Is there anything that you can think to offer to do with someone that might be grieving? Like, what would have been something for you when you were grieving?
I think definitely trying to be really intuitive about if the person really wants to be alone or not, because maybe they're just saying that because they are thinking, oh, I don't want to burden this person. But the person offering is being sincerely genuine and being like, if you need to get out of the house, let's get out of the house. If you want me to come over and just have wine and not talk about it or talk about it for 5 hours, like I genuinely will do that. I just need you to tell me. So maybe just picking up, if somebody can, picking up the cues. If Debbie was like, oh no, it's fine, and I'm like, she's saying it's fine, but I'm not thinking it's fine, like maybe kind of press them a little bit to see if they're like, okay, you're right, like I really could use a friend or something. So not pushing, but maybe just reading a little bit past that and asking yourself, are they saying one thing, but their body language is saying a different thing, and I can tell they actually would maybe want me over there. Just being more mindful in that area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. My husband worked nights, so he would leave the house at like 1 p.m. and wouldn't come home till 1 a.m. And my mother's friend, who was my friend too, used to say, hey, I live right next to where your husband works. Have him drop you off and you can stay at my house and we can just chill. And that way you're not alone. And that to me was a nice offer. I could take her up on it, or I didn't have to. Yeah. And it was comforting to know that I didn't have to sit alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So what are some healthy coping mechanisms that y'all discovered in your processes?
Ooh. Journaling, I think, for sure sitting in the emotions. I'm not saying that has to be done immediately after, but at some point, and then sometimes like people are like, what does that even mean? Like, am I just supposed to sit in a chair and be like, okay, emotions, like I'm waiting? I'm not saying that, but I am saying if you're feeling something, maybe not turn on the TV or something and just be present with them, because they might pass a lot faster than you think they do. Even if you have a bout of sadness, or something for a while. I definitely think, yeah. And talking about them, keeping their memory alive, I think is a wonderful thing to do. And getting to share our stories now, like that's a way to honor our loved ones. And I think it's great. And it's not, so easy to do at the very beginning, but as, time goes on, it's like, we can do this. And you're like, oh, this was great.
Debbie?
Are we talking about honoring our loved ones or kind of like coping with the grief?
Healthy coping mechanism.
Yeah, I went off on a tangent.
No, I'm monkey mind here. I think for me, what helped me in terms of losing a spouse, losing my companionship, was joining some groups. The things that helped me, and this wasn't right at the start.
Right.
I couldn't do that at the beginning. But for me, being alone in the house, four walls, a retired person, and so what helped me was ultimately starting to join some groups in a really calm kind of way, things that were really low stakes. Like I joined a yoga class and then look, there were friendly women. Ultimately, when I was doing a little better and I didn't like my weekends and was really questioning living as a single person, I joined hiking groups. And so I would spend my weekends hiking in a nice co-ed group with friendly folks. And that's really helped me. I moved 2 years ago and I'm in a new community. And what helped me was looking at a few groups and saying, well, I could join this. And hey, there's a Facebook group for hikers that's here. And that's what's really helped me, because from there you get connections with people and you can open your front door and feel better, at least for me.
Yeah, I like that. Sometimes when we lose someone close to us or we're grieving, we sometimes go into a headspace of, why am I here? Why am I the one that's still living? Why aren't they here? And so for those people that are out there feeling that, because I know I felt that, I had survivor's guilt because my health was in jeopardy too. Is it okay to live?
Well, I would say yes. I didn't deal with survivor's guilt, but of course the answer is yes. Debbie might be able to speak a little bit more onto that, but I didn't experience that. So yeah.
Yeah, I did experience that because, my husband passed and I felt that I'd been a bad caregiver and he was in denial. So I had a lot of anger. He did some things that made it very difficult towards the end. And I did have a lot of survivor's guilt, and it took me a long time to get over it. Therapy was a huge help. I needed that to really deal with the survivor's guilt more than anything else. But I mean, ultimately, I think we have to accept and believe that the people we've lost would want us to live the best lives we could. And that I don't believe in like everybody has a purpose kind of thing, but the idea that we can still have connections and have good lives and get over our guilt with that. Again, writing helped me. I think that's kind of my subtext when I talk, is that writing really helped me, and sharing this publicly actually helped me. Because I remember I was a Huffington Post blogger and I wrote a thing about caregiver guilt and how I just felt so awful and how I yelled at my husband. And within like a few hours, I had 80 comments from other people saying they'd been through the same thing. Don't blame yourself. He'd want you to have a good life. And that was a real turning point for me to realize I hadn't really done anything wrong. I'd done the best I could in super hard circumstances. And that's what I'd want to tell other people who have this kind of guilt. Like, you did the best you could in super hard circumstances. And it, if when they're in their right minds and everything, the people you loved want you and who still love you and yourself, you deserve to have a good life. You haven't done anything wrong.
Mm-hmm. How can we take what we have lost and incorporate it into our lives? So how have you all taken what you've lost and incorporated it into your lives now?
For me, starting my podcast was like I needed to heal, like, and deal with my mom's losing her and the anxiety that I had. So I feel like I felt so alone. None of my friends had lost their mom. I still believe that I'm still the only one in like my close friends circle that had lost their mom. And so I felt alone in a lot of situations. Like, my daughter obviously couldn't relate. My boyfriend couldn't relate. There's nobody around me that can relate to my story. And so I hated knowing that there were other people alone, not necessarily that have lost parents, whatever their situation. They just felt isolated and alone, especially during COVID. So that's when I did start my podcast to have other people share stories of whatever they were going through, to inspire others, or to have stories of like, oh, I kind of relate to this. I can relate to, Debbie's story, and wow, she made it through, and she's done all this amazing stuff or whatever. So I feel like I did finally turn my pain into a purpose and to like help others know that. Like, another thing is, with losing my mom at the age that I did, I feel like, that support system. So me wanting to help people, I don't know. I've had to work through like so much stuff that like anything that I've had to work through and I've overcame, I want to help other people do the same thing, whether that has to be with grief or self-worth issues or whatever it is. So that's how I've been able to, turn that around and make a difference and an impact.
I like it. Debbie?
I very much wanted, I think, to help other widows feel that they weren't alone. Ultimately, I don't know how successful I've been with that, but I did kind of want to share what that was like and some of the depths, because I didn't think that was really being communicated. And that's when I started my blog. Nicole, I know you like my email address, the Hungover Widow. My blog was the Hungover Widow.
I love
when
that.
I put that in this morning to share that link, I chuckled. I said, I love this.
And I did that because I wanted to be like, yeah, we're messed up when this happens. Don't feel alone if you're handling this in a way you think is not good.
Right.
So I really wanted to share some of that and help other widows, I guess, to feel less alone, and also to see the absurdity and just very much the surrealism of when you are a single person after a long relationship and you're a little older, well, like I am, your midlife people. And that led me to, the articles I've written in some places and ultimately in my book. And now just in general, talking to widows, if that, or grievers, if that comes up.
Yeah. Ladies, do you have any other things you want to talk about as far as grief goes that maybe I didn't get to?
The only thing that I feel for me, because I didn't talk about my dad at all. And if either of you ladies were like, oh, she talks about her mom a lot. The one interesting thing about my dad is when I lost my dad, it was a completely different situation. I was grieving a relationship I never got to have with my dad because he was in my life younger. But then when my parents divorced, he basically went his separate ways. And I talked to him twice a year on holidays. And so when I lost him, it sucked. It was still painful. So, there's so many different degrees of grief and all those things. And one of them can be the grief of losing somebody that wasn't even really in your life to begin with. So that messed me up in a way. Like, when I found out when he passed away, I was crying he was gone, but I was more crying that I knew I was never going to get the chance to have a relationship with him ever again. Like that sealed the deal right there, you know? And so maybe a listener, has experienced that type of grief before, of mourning that type of loss, that they'll never get that opportunity.
Yeah,
So
my
just
dad
addressing
died
that.
before I was able to meet him, so I can
Yep.
completely understand that I had these hopes and dreams of my father is out there, and when I went to look for him, he was gone forever. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Debbie?
kind of experienced that a little bit with losing my mom because, I lost her when I was 10, and there were times in adolescence when I thought it would have been a lot easier if I'd had a mom to help me with certain things. Yes, I figured out tampons by myself. Can I say that? But and ultimately other kinds of things. So sometimes I sort of missed her, and I missed who I would have been maybe if I'd had a mom. I don't know who that is. Kind of delve into that again in my book. It's kind of like the idea of my being the ghost of who I would have been if my mom had lived, and I would have had that. Winding it down, though, the one thing that I do want to say is that, if you're for a kind of grief, if you're willing to look at it, I think things can get a lot better. It just takes a super long time. And that's kind of my message, because 10 years after my loss, my husband died in 2013. Overall, not on every day, I'm pretty happy, and my life is really different, and it's a lot better, but I didn't feel that way 1, 2, or even 3 years. So I guess I just want to talk about that. The recovery and making change and things just takes so much longer, but that you don't know what's going to happen in the future. There is still this sense of a possible better future with less sorrow.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So if anyone wants to reach out to you girls to discuss grief with you, is there ways that they can find you?
For me, you can check out just the website. My website is easiest, the bright side of life podcast.com. And there's a contact page on there. I'm happy to answer any questions or to talk with you.
Nice.
I love that, the bright side of life.
My last name's Bright, so it works. Sorry.
Yeah, I just feel so cheerful. You can find me through my website, Debbie Weiss Author. And the easiest way to find me, as Nicole did, is on Facebook, where I'm Debbie Weiss. I don't look at my author page much there anymore, but I am Debbie Weiss on Facebook, and I'm also Debbie Weiss Author on Instagram. And I hang out on both of those places, and my website, Debbie Weiss Author. Someone just contacted me through there today, so I know it works.
Nice. And what is the title of your book, Debbie?
Can I do this? Is this
cheesy? Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
This isn't cheesy. My book is available as is, A Midlife Widow's Search for Love. And that's available as is because us older singles are kind of like, we're available as is. We have our baggage.
I love that.
And where can we purchase that?
It's on Amazon.
Perfect.
It's 99 cents because I want more readers. It's on Kindle Unlimited. And, I always put a plug in, though, for local bookstores, because my local bookstore here in Benicia has been so awesome to me.
Awesome.
I'm on Amazon.
Awesome. I'm going to grab a copy off of Amazon, especially at that price.
Thank you.
So definitely feel free to reach out to these ladies, especially if you're going through something, if you've lost a spouse, if you've lost a loved one, if you're going through a relationship loss, anything, reach out and talk to these women because they've gone through it too. Girls, I appreciate you having this conversation with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking us. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this has been.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing and being so open, because I feel like the more we are open, the more conversations we can have on these subjects, the more people will stop saying silly things to people and maybe lift some stigma that surrounds things that we all go through.
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you for spending time listening to our conversation. If you enjoyed this and other episodes, please subscribe, like, and share so we can reach more listeners with our powerful messages. And stay tuned to hear about our affiliates and recommendations. They change from episode to episode.